Welcome to the Sewillow knit-along video for the Chunky Malva Wrap Cardigan knitting pattern. This cardigan remains one of our most popular patterns, but sometimes knitters get stuck on the flat side seam, which is an unusual method. So we hope this knit-along video will help guide you effortlessly through the pattern to see how achievable this fairly quick knit garment can be to make. The cardigan is knitted in two pieces on circular needles with a sideways knitting technique which starts at one sleeve edge. The two sides are then grafted together at the center of the back. For this project I'll be using Drops Wish in a light grey mole colour. This yarn is a chunky blow yarn which adds a wonderful texture and warmth. Unfortunately, at the time of publishing this video, Drops Wish is being discontinued. However, the pattern does include other yarn recommendations. You can also substitute Drops Wish with 2 strands of Drops Air, which will give a very similar quality and feel. Before starting, if you're printing your pattern, I recommend using a highlighter to mark your size on the pattern pages. This will make it much easier to follow the instructions for your specific size. I'm going to use the long tail cast-on method. To work out how much of a tail I need, I simply wrap the yarn around the needle for the same number of stitches I'll be casting on. This usually provides a good indication of the tail length required. Using your circular needles, start by making a slip knot, leaving enough of a tail based on the number of stitches you need. Place the slip knot on your needle and pull it snug. Hold the needle in your right hand and with your left hand position the yarn tail over your thumb and the working yarn over your index finger, creating a V shape. Move the needle under the strand on your thumb, then over and under the strand on your index finger. Pull the yarn through the loop on your thumb and tighten gently. Continue this motion, moving under the thumb strand, over the index finger strand, and pulling through the loop on your thumb until you have cast on the required number of stitches. Now it's time to join the cast-on stitches in the round to enable knitting with a magic loop or trailing loop method. Start by dividing your cast-on stitches evenly onto the circular needle, being careful not to twist any of the stitches. Slide half of the stitches onto one needle tip and the other half onto the second needle tip. I'm using a slightly shorter circular needle than recommended in the pattern, so I'm going to divide my stitches into 3 sections. You want to start your first round with the working yarn on the back of the right hand needle. Note that I knit continental style, so my working yarn held in my left hand, but the same methods apply for English style knitters. Knit the first stitch on the left needle, pulling it snug to join in the round. Continue knitting in the round, adjusting the loop as needed by pulling the cable to redistribute the stitches evenly on your needles as you work. From here you just continue to knit in the round. I find the first couple of rounds are the hardest. Once your sleeve length grows, the stitches have more space to move around the needles and it does become easier to slide them along the cable as you continue to knit. As the tube of the sleeve keeps getting longer by knitting in the round, I find I simply have to pull on the cable on the right hand needle side to slide the stitches along, keeping a loop of cable on the right. Keep knitting the sleeve tube in the round. This is by far the most time-consuming part of the project, so don't give up. And then finally, when the sleeve measures the length indicated on the pattern instructions, you are now ready to move on to the side seams. Still using your circular needles, we're now going to cast on extra stitches onto the right-hand needle, which will become the side seam. I'm using the backwards loop method. Hold the yarn in your left hand, make a loop by twisting the yarn, and place it on the needle. Repeat this process for each cast-on stitch required. Once that's done, turn your work so that the working yarn from the end of the newly cast-on stitches is now on the left. We're now going to pull into these new stitches, and we're no longer knitting in the round. When you get to the end of the newly cast on stitches, continue to purl into your previous stitches from the sleeve tube. You may find you have to wiggle your stitches around on the circular needle cable a bit to purl into that tube shape. Once you finish purling into the last stitch of the tube, take a moment to pause without turning your work. In this next example, I have managed to switch to longer circular needles to help with the tutorial. Still holding onto your right hand needle, your left hand needle should now be free with the newly cast on stitches that you purled before purling the inner tube of the sleeve. With your free left hand needle, we're going to pick up and pull each one of the loops from the newly cast on stitches nearest to your right hand needle. But before we do that, I'm going to include a tip here which is not in the pattern instruction. On the first stitch that you pick up, go ahead and also pick up the loop between the stitch you picked up and the right hand needle. Then purl those two together. This will help to avoid big holes in the underarm area. So now we pick up the next loop from the previous cast-ons and purl that stitch, and continue with this method all the way until the end of the row. If you're finding this method a bit fiddly, I have another way to do this step that some of you might find easier. Using a straight knitting needle in a similar or slightly smaller size, pick up the loops from the cast-on stitches. Instead of picking up individual loops nearest to the right hand needle, start from the edge closest to the end of the left hand needle and pick up all the loops. As per the tip from the other method, also pick up the loop between the last picked up stitch and the stitch on the right hand needle. Now use your right hand needle to purl together the first two stitches. Then continue to individually purl all the other stitches on the straight knitting needle. You can now start to see the side seam, especially as we turn our work around with the right side up. Remember to add a stitch marker at this point so that you don't accidentally switch to knitting in the round on your circular needles. Now we're going to knit the next round, going all along the side seam edge, around the sleeve tube and down the other side seam edge. At the end of the round, simply turn and purl the next row in the same manner. From here on, keep going back and forth. As you can see here, you're now knitting the underarm and shoulder edge of your cardigan. Keep knitting back and forth until your sleeve edge to upper shoulder edge measures the length indicated on the pattern instructions, ending on a purl row. But you can also simply subtract the arm length from this and then measure from the side seam outwards. For a size 8, this is 10 centimeters because basically I'm measuring the rows I've knitted since casting on. On the next row, you're going to knit half of the stitches as indicated on the pattern, and then move those knitted stitches onto stitch holders. As you can see, I've chosen to use a tapestry needle to move my stitches onto a length of scrap yarn. And now continue to knit the remainder of stitches still on your needle. For this panel, you simply keep going back and forth in stockinette stitch until the piece measures the length indicated on the pattern instructions. You can now place those stitches on stitch holders, or in my case, transfer them to a length of scrap yarn. Now to work the right front panel. I'm going to pick up the stitches I previously placed on hold before completing the back panel. Once on the needles, have the wrong side facing up so that you can join a new piece of yarn and purl those stitches for the first row. Rather than weaving in the tail end, I tend to just purl the loose tail with the working yarn after the first stitch. At the end of the row, turn your work and knit all but the last 3 stitches. Remember when you get towards the end of the row not to confuse your double strand stitches that weaves the tail end for 2 stitches. So on those last 3 stitches, you're going to knit 2 together through the back loop and then knit the last stitch normally. Now when you turn your work, you're going to purl 1, purl 2 together and then continue to purl to the end of the row. From here on, you'll be repeating those 2 rows continuously, decreasing at the end of each knit row and decreasing at the start of each purl row until there are 34 stitches left on the needles. At this point, you'll continue as before, but you'll also add a knit 2 together through the back loop at the start of every 7th knit row. To keep track of these additional decreases, I like to mark 6 rows on a piece of paper and tick them off as I go along, ensuring I remember to do this extra decrease when I return to row 1. Here you can see how the slanting crossover neckline edge with its decreased stitches is starting to look. Once you are left with 4 stitches only, you are now ready to start the side tie by simply knitting back and forth in stockinette stitch. Keep going until your side tie matches the measurement for your size on the pattern instructions. You can now bind off those last 4 stitches. One half of your cardigan is done, and we can now move on to the other half. For the second half of your wrap cardigan, you will be repeating all the same steps to knit the sleeve and then creating the side seam. Once you have done your side seam, this is where the 2 sides are constructed differently. For this left front panel, you will be adding a buttonhole through which you can thread the side tie. Unfortunately, I forgot to film this step when making my cardigan, so in this clip I'm going to show you the method used for constructing the hole on a sample piece. If you can imagine, this extra cable is the side seam edge. On the next row, when you knit, rather than knitting to the end, you will knit until there are 8 stitches left on the needle. To begin the tie hole, bring your working yarn to the front, slip 1 stitch purlwise, bring your yarn to the back, slip 1 stitch purlwise. Now pass the first slip stitch over the second. Slip another stitch purlwise and pass over the previous slip stitch. Do this one more time. Now place the last stitch back onto the left needle and turn your work. Cast on 4 stitches using the cable cast on method. This cast on method simply requires you to insert the needle between 2 stitches, pick up or wrap the yarn around to pull a loop forwards, pull it through and place it on the left needle. Do this 4 times in total. Turn your work and bring your yarn to the back and slip the first stitch on the left needle onto the right needle and pass the last cast on stitch over it. Now knit the last 4 stitches. Now when you turn your work, simply purl normally. But you can see that although a bit fiddly, this method of making a buttonhole makes a very neat and secure buttonhole which won't stretch the stitches around it. Next, after purling the following row, you will start shaping the neckline as per the other side. However, on this side of the cardigan, you will be decreasing at the start of your knit rows and at the end of your purl rows. Once 34 stitches remain on the needles, you will also add a decrease at the end of every 7th knit row, just like on the other side. And again, when you have only 4 stitches remaining, you simply knit in stockinette stitch, but make sure to keep going to create an even longer side tie as indicated by the measurements for your size on the pattern instructions. To complete the left side of your cardigan, you will need to pick up the remaining stitches placed on hold and knit back and forth in stockinette stitch until your back panel measures the same as the first back panel. Keep your final row of knitting from your left cardigan piece on your needles without snapping the yarn. To measure the tail length of yarn you will need, use roughly 3 times the width of your knitted piece, then cut and thread a tapestry needle. You will need to transfer the stitches from your right back panel from the stitch holder onto a separate knitting needle. A straight needle works great for this. Now for the Kitchener stitch method, arrange the 2 pieces of knitting to be joined so that the inner purl sides are together and the needles are parallel. There should be an equal number of stitches on each needle. For the first bit, we are going to insert the tapestry needle purlwise into the first stitch on the front needle and pull the yarn through, leaving the stitch on the needle. Now insert the tapestry needle knitwise into the first stitch on the back needle, pulling the yarn through and also leaving the stitch on the needle. Bring your tapestry needle back to the front needle, inserting the needle knitwise through the first stitch on the needle and remove that stitch. Then insert the tapestry needle purlwise into the second stitch on the front needle, pull the yarn and leave the stitch in place. Now insert the tapestry needle purlwise into the first stitch on the back needle and pull the yarn through, removing the stitch from the needle. Then insert the tapestry needle knitwise into the second stitch on the back needle, pull the yarn through and leave the stitch on the needle. Now continue with these 4 steps. On the front needle, step 1, insert knitwise, slide off. Step 2, insert purlwise into the next stitch, keep in place. For the back needle, step 3, insert purlwise, slide off. Step 4, insert knitwise into the next stitch and keep in place. And continue repeating these 4 steps. Front knit slide, front purl keep, back purl slide, back knit keep. Keep going until all of your stitches have been grafted together. Even out the tension before weaving in the tail end of your yarn. Then weave in all the extra tail ends on your garment and block your garment according to the yarn manufacturer's instructions. Your wrap cardigan is now ready for wearing. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment if you have found this video helpful, and feel free to tag Sewillow on Instagram and share your cardigan on Ravelry. I always love seeing all of your creations.